Gobi Desert, the $25 trillion lie killing China's economy. A wall of sand swallows the skyline. Beijing sky turns copper at noon. Flights divert. Ports shut. Traders watch a $1 trillion week vanish as dust slams into the Jingjingjai core. 10 meters a year, dunes crawl toward rails that feed coal plants and rare earth roots. Out in Inner Mongolia, ghost forests stand gray and dead, green on paper, gone on the ground. Water lifelines to 400 million people run thinner. You're not gonna believe this. The fix China sold the world, the Great Green Wall, might be feeding the very desert it was built to stop. Here's where things get interesting. The lie we bought. So let's start with the story we all bought. Plant trees across the north, stitch a living shield, stop the sand. The 3 North Shelterbelt, what headlines call the Great Green Wall, was pitched as a miracle, decades-long, country-scale, science-backed. On maps, it's a bold arc from Xinjiang across Inner Mongolia, Ningxia and Gansu, bending through Hebei to hold the dust before it hits the capital. It sounded clean, numbers soared, hectares reported, seedlings planted. Success, right. But here's the thing, out on the line where farm meets June, the math never cared about planting day, it cared about year 5. And by year 5, in plantation after plantation, up to 80% of those fast-growing belts, poplars and pines, were gone, dead trunks upright like rows of fence posts. Locals started calling them ghost forests. On paper, they still existed. In the wind, they didn't. Why water? Poplars are thirsty sprinters. They drink hard, grow fast, and in dry belts they outdrink the sky. Evapotranspiration beats rainfall, wells drop. Shallow aquifers, which feed springs, streams, and the capillary moisture that keeps native grasses alive, get pulled down. The Shelterbelt starts killing the very ground that holds it. Then comes the salt. As groundwater sinks, salty water wicks up, crusts the surface, cooks roots. First the poplar's brown, then the understory dies. Finally, when the canopy collapses, bare soil bakes, seals and sheds rain like a parking lot. One hot summer and a wind shift later, there goes the topsoil. Get this, locals weren't planting poplars because they loved poplars. They planted them because quotas loved poplars. Tall, fast, photo-friendly, a green KPI. Provincial reports counted survival in year 1, not year 5. Contracts paid for stems in the ground, not living cover through drought cycles. So crews planted tight, ran trucks to water them through the photo window, and moved on. The desert waited them out. Meanwhile, the front line stretched thin. Inner Mongolia's fragile steppe, once the buffer, got plowed in the 1950s and 1960s, grazed hard in the 1970s and 1980s, and logged for fuel when winters bit. By the time the Shelterbelt scaled in the 1990s and 2000s, the North's hydrology was already limping. Rivers like the Hai and Xiang ran in pulses. The Tarim's branches grew fickle. Add belts of thirsty trees, and you didn't get a wall, you got a straw. But wait, there's more. Dust isn't loyal to borders. When the sky turns brown in the Gobi source zones, that plume rides jets 2,000 kilometers. It smacks cities, shuts airports, chokes ports, slows cranes, grinds logistics. A brown sky week can drag $100 billion off weekly trade in the Jingjingjai Triangle. That's not a budget line in a forestry bureau. That's money bleeding from airlines, shipping, factories, data centers on backup filters, hospitals surging with respiratory cases. So why did we buy it? Because the visuals were perfect. Satellite greenness, the NDVI popped after planting, pressed tours saw rows of saplings, fenced dunes, drip lines sparkling in morning light. A year later, still green, 2 years, green enough. Then subsidies ended, trucks stopped. 5 summers in, the NDVI fell through the floor, but those images didn't trend. Here's where it gets interesting. Some places actually worked. Gobi Desert turned into a showcase, private money, careful fencing, native shrubs like licorice, drip on a budget, and side hustles with solar arrays and herb markets. Survival was tied to water accounting, not hectares. Profit forced patience, but Gobi sits on a dune water setup you can't copy-paste. Try that model in the Hexi Corridor or Hunschendake, where the water table sits deep and winds cut different, and the same poplars implode. The banner, Great Green Wall success, became a mirage you could not scale. Meanwhile, a quiet accounting trick kept the miracle alive. Local governments financed tree counts through LGFVs, local government financing vehicles, issuing green bonds against KPI promises. Plant X million trees, report Y hectares, unlock Z funding. Cash flow from trees, zero. Maintenance budgets, thin. 5-year survival, not the metric. When plantations died, you replant, roll debt, and call it a new phase. On spreadsheets, it looked like forward motion. On the ground, it was debt stapled to dead wood. Unknown to many outside the corridor, dunes aren't just coming for villages. They creep toward the coal rails that feed power plants and the trucking lanes that move rare earths, from places like Bayan Obo to processors and then to the world's magnets and motors. A dune nudging 10 meters a year doesn't care about your batch schedule. A single storm can bury a line, sandblast insulators, and shut a corridor for days. The clearance costs stack. The outages ripple through grids and factories far from the dust. So the central question lands hard. Did the Great Green Wall fix the desert or feed it? Because if your wall drinks more water than the sky gives back, if your forests ghost out by year 5, if your success depends on counting stems instead of shade that lasts, then you're not holding the line. You're moving it toward the cities you're trying to protect. And that's the lie we bought. That trees, any trees, anywhere, equal control. That scale beats ecology. That optics beat hydrology. The field data keeps saying the opposite. Native shrubs and grasses that sip, not gulp. Spacing that lets winds slow but not scour. Payment for survival at 5 and 10 years, not for planting day celebrations. The story we were sold was simple. The ground truth is. So let's test their fix against what the land is telling us. 3 shocking facts by 500. Shock 1 lands in the dirt, not the lab. In plantation belts across the 3 North program, field checks kept hitting the same number, up to 80% mortality by years 3 to 5 in monocultures, poplars, pines, the fast-growth favorites. Stakes, that's not just lost trees. It's lost shade, lost root grip, and a stripped surface the wind can grab. Farmers who banked on shelter lose crops when the wall thins to sticks. Crews face replant cycles that drain budgets. And communities that were promised a calmer sky get a harsher one. Here's what actually happened. Saplings go in dense, photogenic straight lines perfect for a minister's tour. The first year, trucks bring water, fences keep goats out, the NDVI pops green from space. Year 2, support thins. By year 3, the water tab catches up. The groundwater drops, salts creep. Needles bronze, leaves curl. Year 5, you're walking through a timber graveyard, row after row of grey poles. People start calling these places ghost forests because the forest exists only on the report. And in the wind shadow that once slowed sand, you've now got channels that funnel gusts. Impact, immediate replant orders, sure, but the second cycle faces a drier, saltier bed. That means lower survival, higher costs, and more pressure to find green funding to cover the same patch twice. Meanwhile, dust export rises because collapse exposes finer soils. The fix becomes a feedback loop that feeds the problem. Shock 2 rides the jet stream. These dust plumes don't stop at county lines. A single brown sky week slams the Jingjingjai corridor, Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei shuttering airports, halting container yards, forcing ships to idle offshore. Stakes, $100 billion in weekly trade can get knocked sideways. Airlines reroute, ports pause crane ops. Truck convoys wait out, visibility drops. Factory lines go slow because intake filters clog faster than the maintenance schedule. On the ground, action looks like this. Pilots wave off landings, terminal boards flip to delayed, port sirens go quiet, commuters mask up as PM10 spikes, ERs fill with people wheezing through inflamed lungs. Stocks dip as logistics jam, and the impact doesn't end with blue skies. Backlogs ripple for weeks, missed export windows, contract penalties, energy demand spikes from cleanup and hospital loads. If you're an executive with margins tied to just-in-time freight, a dust week just ate your quarter. Shock 3 cuts to water, the hidden budget. Poplar belts outdrink rainfall across big chunks of the front. Stakes, rivers that once ran as threads, Hai Xiang, parts of the Tarim network, feel their flow nicked not just by farms but by trees. Wells drift saline, fields go white at the edges. Villages deepen boreholes until the diesel cost beats the crop price. Action on the land. After planting, evapotranspiration jumps. The capillary fringe falls. Stoltz wick crust forms. Native shrubs that sip like saxaul or saltbush give way to bare patches because the microclimate shifted. Even after the poplars die, the surface stays sealed, rain beads and runs, not sinks. Springs that fed herders wink out. Impact: crop yields slide, farm exits rise, and crucially, aquifers lose resilience. When drought hits, there's no buffer. And downstream, cities spend more to treat dirtier water or pull from transfers. Which means, get ready for this, the wall was quietly turning off taps for people it claimed to protect. The inciting incident: when the sky turned brown. It started as a blur on the horizon, just a smear where the Hebei Hills should have been. By mid-morning, the sun looked wrong, like a dull coin. Then phones lit up with the same clip, commuters on the 6th ring watching a wall of dust climb over the overpasses. The sky went copper. The air smelled like a dry attic. You could taste grit on your teeth. Visibility fell to a few car lengths, and traffic slid into a crawl as hazard lights flickered through the haze. While that was happening in Beijing, tower controllers at Capital and Daxing called it. Landings waved off, departures stacked and then scrubbed. Out at Tianjin port, gantry cranes paused because operators couldn't see the spreaders. Ships idled offshore. The port radios were calm, but you could hear the urgency: hold, wait, don't swing that load. In Tangshan, coal trains eased to a stop while crews checked for sand on the rails. Power schedulers rerouted where they could, and then they ran out of slack. Across the Jingjinjai core, the hum of uptimes slipped a gear. Inside the city, the day turned into a health lesson. Monitors flashed PM10 and PM25 spikes. Clinics pulled extra staff. People with asthma wrote the script you never forget. First the tickle, then the cough you can't shake, then that squeezed feeling that makes every breath a chore. Parents wrapped scarves around kids and hustled them indoors. Stores taped door gaps. Subway entrances funneled crowds because street crossings looked like walking into fog. Here's where it gets interesting. On the evening news, the line was climate: a warm winter, a dry spring, stronger westerlies, all true. But in the chat groups from Ningxia to Inner Mongolia, farmers and herders swapped a different map, the one only people on the ground keep in their heads. They posted shots of rows of dead poplars leaning like pickets, bare soil where understories used to be, river bends that once pooled and now showed cracked mud. One message stuck: the trees that were supposed to hold the sand are gone, the rivers are low, what did you expect the wind to do? Unknown to most in the city, the storm didn't start with one big gust. It built over days. In the interdunes, the low swales between fixed sand hills, the crusts that formed after plantations failed were already brittle. A few early gusts lifted the finest grains first. As the surface roughness dropped, the wind got a cleaner fetch. Then, kilometer by kilometer, the storm drew a line south. This was the moment everything changed, because by the time the city saw orange noon, the source zones were already stripped another notch. Microstory: a dispatcher in a logistics park outside Tianjin had just finished his noodles when the first alerts buzzed. He stepped outside, squinted, and his coffee cup rattled in the wind. 20 minutes later, he was on the phone telling clients he couldn't move reefer containers because visibility and dust would ruin seals. Tomorrow, he said. It turned into 4 days. By late afternoon, trading screens showed the tell. Airlines slid. Port-linked names slipped. An index fund tied to manufacturing gave up a week's gains in an hour. No one rang a bell, but people who watch this stuff knew. Every brown sky week writes a bill that shows up in backlogs, penalties, cleanup, missed slots. The costs don't land in one place. They spread like the dust did. Officials stood up in briefings and pointed to regional drought and a bad wind pattern. And sure, the climate dice are loading, but the locals were blunt. You can't plant thirsty trees across a dry belt, watch them die, and then act surprised when the ground turns to powder. One herder posted a 5-second clip, his well a crank, the bucket clanking on dry stone. Caption: the forest drank first. To understand why that one sentence hit so hard, we need to go back. Not long, just long enough to see the choices that set this up, the way the steppe got plowed, the way quotas set the species list, the way water budgets got ignored because hectares photographed better. 60 years in 60 seconds will do it. Then the reversals start. Historical root cause window 400500. 3 years after the founding of the People's Republic, the plan was simple: make the North feed the nation. In the 1950s, Carters marked the steppe as idle, and told brigades to plow. What nobody knew at the time, or ignored, was that those grasses were the skin that held the land. You turned the sod, you cut the roots, and the wind got its first clean run. By the 1960s, the Shelterbelt idea had a slogan and a quota: trees as a shield. It felt bold, modern, scientific. Only the incentives pushed numbers, not fit. Plant anything that stands up straight. Plant tight, plant fast. This was the moment everything changed, because success became a hectare on a ledger, not a living cover that could ride out 5 summers. Meanwhile, life on the ground bent to winters and fuel. People cut shrubs for heat. Herds grazed the short grass down to stubble because animals are cash and meat. Wells were hand-dug, shallow and fickle. When a dry year hit, you moved or you pushed deeper. Local water rules were old and bent under state drives that wanted grain from everywhere. The steppes' old give and take, graze, rest, move broke. Then the 1980s hit with reform and scale. The 3 North Shelterbelt program got its big arcs on maps. Factories wanted power and coal routes got built across the very edges that used to hold dunes in place. To protect those rails and fields, counties planted belts, monocultures on land that never asked for trees. Grain to green arrived as a pivot after floods in the late 1990s, but the subsidy machine still paid for stems, not survival. People fenced land, planted rows, and waited for checks. In the first 2 years, the land looked green enough. Then the water math called in the debt. Here's the crazy part. Success was measured by how much land turned dark on a satellite map. Greener meant good, but greenness off a poplar canopy hides the stress underneath. The water table drops, salts rise, the understory thins. 5 years later, the NDVI that once spiked falls, and the system is worse than the start. Less roughness, more bare crust, faster wind. Unknown to planners in far offices, the rivers the belts leaned on, Hai Xiang, tributaries of the Tarim, were never bank accounts with infinite draw. They were seasonal allowances cut by upstream diversions, climate swings, and old irrigation inefficiencies. Every thirsty belt added a straw. The local joke turned bitter. We built shields that drink. By the 2000s and 2010s, a second accounting entered the story: debt. Local government financing vehicles sold green paper to hit targets. The more you planted, the more you could borrow, but trees don't pay vouchers. And when the belts failed, the fix wasn't to rethink the species or spacing. It was to replant, roll, and report. That's the root, not malice, momentum. A mix of post-war hunger, quota culture, cheap symbols, and a blind spot the size of a desert. To see how that blind spot eats money and land, we need the water math. Hydrological trap, planting thirst. So here's the water budget, the part nobody wanted on the poster. In dry belts, there's a narrow line between what the sky gives and what the land can lose. Poplars don't care about that line, they run hot. In the first 3 years, evapotranspiration spikes because you've added leaf area that breathes water into the air like a row of pumps. Rain stays the same or drops in a warm year, but draw rises. The shallow aquifer that hangs close enough to feed grasses dips. Wells respond. Springs dim. The capillary fringe, the invisible ribbon that keeps the topsoil damp enough to stick, falls. Stakes, everything alive at the surface depends on that fringe. When it pulls down, salts in the soil water rise to meet the heat. The sun does the rest. You get a white crust on the ground that hardens like a glaze. Roots hate it, microbes hate it, and when a gust hits that crust, it fractures, turns to crumbs, and slides away as dust. You didn't just fail to stop the sand, you primed it. Here's what actually happens in a plantation that looks fine from the road. The drip tape pulses in year 1, maybe year 2. The poplars push tall fast because that's what they're built to do. Their roots find the sweet water, and then because the spacing is tight, they all pull from the same shallow lens. Soil moisture collapses between rows. The understory withers because no light, then no water. By the 3rd summer, you see the tips brown, the leaves curl, the cambium dries. A hot week finishes the weaker stems. Year 5, a 3rd major drought hits, and the stand is more whole than tree. Impact, the land skin changes. With the canopy gone, the soil takes the full hit of sun and wind. The crust that formed under the trees stays hydrophobic, rain beads and runs. Instead of soaking, storms sheet off and carve rills. Even a good summer doesn't fix it because the salts stay near the surface and the aquifer is still low. You get less infiltration, more flash. The next time wind picks up, it finds a flatter, smoother fetch and lifts finer particles that go farther, higher, longer. But wait, there's more. Rivers meant to feed fields and towns feel the bite. Shelterbelts intercept not just groundwater, but the shallow subsurface flow that would have bled into channels as base flow. The high rivers' lower reaches blink between trickle and bone. The Xiang River's oases thicken with salt at the edges. Parts of the Tarim system that once seeped through willow fringes now surge and crash in floods, but can't sustain a thread in dry spells. Cities, reading falling gauges and clouded intakes, open their wallets. More pumps, more treatment, more transfer. Here's the crazy part, the fix that doesn't drink the sky already exists. Native shrubs and grasses, saxaul, saltbush, niterbush, deeply adapted, weirdly tough, low and rough enough to slow wind without tapping deep aquifers like a straw. They root in patches, not grids. They leave space for soil to breathe and water to sink. In mixed mosaics, they keep moisture in the top horizon and build a crumbly structure that holds when hit. They don't give you photo-perfect rows, and that's exactly why they work. In places that flip to shrubs first, the hydrology changes direction. Evapotranspiration comes down. The capillary fringe creeps back. Microbes restart the slow churn that turns dust to soil. You see mosses in pockets. Termites stitch crumbs. In a rain, water lingers long enough to sink. Over few seasons, grass toes push into bare seams and hold them. Dust days drop because the land has texture again. Meanwhile, in plantation zones that doubled down, the aquifer keeps falling. You see numbers like 0.5 meter to 2 meters per year in hotspots, and the wells tell the story. Each new bore goes deeper. The diesel bill climbs. Farmers switch to less thirsty crops, then to none, then they leave. Villages hollow. And with fewer eyes and hands, fences fail, goats stray, the few shrubs that survived get clipped, and the wind wins again. Unknown to planners, interdunes, the low swales, become the new emitters after plantation collapse. Fixed dunes, crusted and vegetated, can hold for decades. But when the belts fail between them, the smooth zones open fetch where none existed. A storm now has highway lanes it didn't have in the 1970s. That's why storms feel worse, even when total sand volume hasn't changed much. The land's roughness map got erased. So what does a hydrologically sane shield look like? Grass first. You seed tough natives and give them a breather, rotational grazing, not bans forever. You pay herders to rest patches, then let them back in when roots and litter build. You add shrubs in ribbons that break wind at knee and waist height. Where you need trees, you use drought natives, space them wide, and only above water tables that can carry them without pumps. You skip poplars unless the groundwater is shallow and replenished, river edges, not desert fringe. You also change water logic upstream. Build check dams where they trap silt and spread flow, not where they block it. Protect recharge zones, hill slopes, wadis, so storms can load aquifers. In corridors that must be defended, rails, roads, you go engineered, checkerboard barriers, fences that trap blowing sand before it hits steel, mobile crews that move with the season, not once a year. Impact, dust days fall, aquifers stop dropping and in wet years climb, farmers see springs trickle again, ports see fewer brown shutdowns. You spend less on replanting and more on watching 5-year and 10-year survival as the score, not year one photos. And crucially, you stop paying for thirst. Because in the north, the enemy wasn't the sand, it was the water math. The backfire economics. Let's follow the money, because the water math always sends a bill. On paper, a plantation is a one-time cost. In the field, it's an operating expense that never ends. You plant dense, you truck water, you fence, you patrol. Then the 80% die-off hits by year 5 and you do it again. Replant cycles turn budgets into treadmills. Crews drive farther for scarcer water, pumps run longer, diesel burns, and every liter hauled buys a few green weeks, not a living stand. That's dead capital, cash sunk into blocks that won't throw shade through a single drought cycle. Here's where it gets interesting. Maintenance doesn't just mean watering trees, it means fighting the physics you created. Crusted soils shed rain, so you need more contour ripping and surface roughening after storms. Dead rows become fire risk in dry summers, so you stage crews and equipment. Fences collapse and invite grazers right when new seedlings are most vulnerable, so you replace wire and posts each season. Each fix is small, but stacked over counties and years. The carry eats the line item set aside for actual survival. Now jump to the energy grid, the rail arteries that haul coal out of the north. Sand doesn't just look bad on the right-of-way, it buries it. An advancing dune at 10 meters a year crosses ballast, fouls switches, and loads motors with grit. Clearing a single corridor after a big blow means bulldozers, vacuum trains, crews in respirators, and days of reduced speed limits. Every hour at 20 instead of 60 chops the gigawatts utilities counted on. Plants down the line derate, then call for backup gas, then buy peak power at a premium. You feel it on city load sheets that weren't supposed to wobble in spring. And rare earths, the Bayan Obo complex sits behind lanes that are only as reliable as the sky above them. Dust storms shut pits for safety, then slow crushing and separation because fine dust chokes filters. Concentrate trucking pauses because visibility drops and seals won't hold under abrasive wind. A 48-hour halt isn't just lost tonnage, it's a cascade: smelters idling, magnets and motor lines missing inputs, contract penalties. In a bad month, the cleanup and downtime bill for one corridor can exceed what a province spends on forestry that whole quarter. Urban risk prices in two. Insurers hike premiums for property exposed to repeat brown sky weeks. Municipal budgets absorb emergency responses, masks, clinics on surge, street flushes tearing through water and fuel. Hospitals log spikes in respiratory admissions. Factories replace filters early, pull overtime maintenance, pay expedite fees to unjam shipments. Cleanup alone, sand from rails, grit from substations, silt from drainage, becomes an annual tax. And none of that shows up in the forestry KPI sheet that still celebrates hectares. But wait, there's more: the debt machine powering this theater. Local government financing vehicles issue green bonds to plant trees and hit targets. The collateral is political, promises of greenness, not cash flow. The structure works as long as the music plays: roll maturities, issue new paper, book progress. When plantations fail, there's no revenue to offset interest carry, so you double down, replant the same hectares to justify another tranche. The accounting loves it: new capex, new milestones. The hydrology hates it: thirst on thirst. Rollover risk creeps in because lenders start asking about outcomes, not photos. Meanwhile, the showcase wins like Kabuki distort allocation. Money chases glamour, drip lines glinting under panels, celebrity tour among licorice rows. Copy-paste schemes pop up in basins without shallow water or matching winds. They burn cash until year 3, then stall. The hidden cost is opportunity. Every yuan sunk into a thirsty grid of poplars is a yuan not spent on grass-first mosaics, wind fencing for rails, or upstream recharge. Debt service crowds out the boring fixes that actually work. Here's the crazy part: a single severe Gobi dust event can erase more economic value in a week than multiple provinces spend on greening in a year. Airlines reroute, ports idle, trucking stalls, power derates, hospitals surge, and cleanup crews roll. Multiply that by a handful of events across a decade, add chronic losses from suboptimal operations during shoulder seasons, and you're looking at compounding drag. That's how a wall meant to shield growth becomes a wedge that slows it. Unknown to many watching stock tickers, contamination risk hits high-value industries too. Polysilicon fabs in the north tighten cleanroom protocols during dust weeks. Higher HVAC loads, more filter changes, brief production pauses when counts spike. Each pause ripples through solar supply chains. Data centers crank cooling and filtration, burning extra megawatts right when grids are stressed by derates downstream of sand-hit rails. The grid pays twice, first in lost coal throughput, then in peak spikes to keep critical loads clean and cool. And then there's agriculture. Dust deposition scours young leaves, cuts light and steals planting days. Farmers miss windows, yields slide. Subsidies paper over shortfalls, but the macro math stays ugly. Less output, more support, thinner margins. Rural banks hold loans tied to fields that work fewer days under harsher sky. Defaults don't jump, they creep, quiet, steady, corrosive. So the backfire isn't abstract. It's line items: OPEX spirals from replant cycles, CapEx stranded in dead blocks, logistics losses from sand burial, health costs from PM spikes, insurance and emergency response, derates and downtime in energy and industry, and interest carry from green debt with no cash return. You don't need a storm to see it. You just need the monthly bills. The fix sold as growth turned into an annuity of loss, paid in diesel, filters, missed slots, and rolled debt. And it gets worse when the wind picks up. The Kyubuki Mirage versus the Frontier. Here's where it gets interesting. Kyubuki didn't start with a slogan, it started with a fence. They drew lines to keep grazing off the most fragile faces of the dunes. Then they got small and local, native shrubs first, not trophy trees. Licorice, saxaul, saltbush, plants that sip, root in patches, and throw just enough shade to cool the skin of the sand. Drip lines came next, but not the kind that flood rows for photos. Tight, measured pulses tied to a water ledger that someone actually had to balance. Action on the ground looked boring, which is why it worked. Crews walked dunes with moisture probes. If a section hit target survival, they didn't add more water, they backed off. If a patch lagged, they didn't dump, they thinned. Spacing mattered more than ceremony. They planted mosaics, not carpets, islands that grew together over seasons. The first year it looked like dots on tan paper. By year 5, the dots touched, wind lost speed at knee height, and fine particles stayed put. And Kyubuki had a profit loop. Get ready for this, licorice isn't just a shrub, it's a cash crop. Roots sell into herbal markets. Between shrub rows, they ran grazing corridors on a schedule that matched plant recovery, not holiday calendars. Then came solar, panels on crusted highs where roots wouldn't win, casting shade that cooled sand and cut evaporation underfoot. Panels and shrubs made neighbors, not enemies. Panels broke wind at panel height, shrubs slowed it below. Crews cleaned panels less because grit dropped sooner. Water use stayed on budget because the system didn't demand a deep drink. Impact, survival rates stayed high into year 5 and 10. Not perfect, nothing is, but high enough that replant cycles didn't eat the books. NDVI rose and held. Springs near the project didn't blink as hard in dry spells. And the local workforce had a reason to stick around because wages came from products and power sales, not just subsidies. Profit forced patience, the only discipline that beats drought. But here's the thing, Kyubuki sits on a lucky setup. The dune types are forgiving, mobile, yes, but with layers that hold just enough moisture after a rain to give shrubs a start. Groundwater sits within a reach that a root can find without a pump. Winds have a known pattern you can design around. Copy-paste that into the Hexi corridor, Hunchendake, or the Muas, and you meet a different beast. Deeper water, harsher fetch, crusts that reject rain for whole seasons, and soils that salt harder when you push them. So when teams tried to lift the Kyubuki playbook and drop it east or west, they hit a wall. They fenced, they dripped, they planted poplars to impress investors and watched them implode by year 3. Even with shrubs, they overplanted, crowded root zones, and blew the water budget. Without shallow recharge, drip became a life support you could never turn off. The diesel bill wrote the ending. Here's the crazy part, the satellite told on them. NDVI popped right after planting and then slumped as soon as subsidy schedules ended. In 5-year windows, the curve said it plain, short green, then gray. Kyubuki's line bent up and held. The copycats drew spikes and crashes. From space, the difference looked like noise. On the ground, it was species choice, spacing, and water math. Stakes, misreading Kyubuki doesn't just waste money, it deepens risk on the frontier. In the Hexi corridor, rails, highways, and waysys strung along mountains, the wrong planting pulls down fragile aquifers that keep towns alive. In Hunchendake, overgrazed steppe already lost its cushion, layering poplars on top cracks what's left. In Muas, shallow crusts turn slick under failed belts and become emitters that feed storms that hammer cities hundreds of kilometers away. So what actually travels from Kyubuki? Not the brand, the rules. 1. Fence smart but with a clock rest, then graze, then rest again because hoofbeats can help seeds set when timed right. 2. Shrubs first in bands with gaps, let wind bleed, not crash. 3. Water is a budget, not a vibe, measure, cap, and step down as roots find their own. 4. Only plant trees where the table can carry them without a truck. 5. Pay for 5 and 10-year survival, not day 1 photos. That last one flips incentives more than any drone shot ever will. Micro story. A county chief from Gansu toured Kyubuki and loved the panels. 6 months later, he stood in front of a brand new array over poplar rows in a basin with a sinking aquifer. Year 2, half the trees browned. Year 3, the array stood over a brush field of dead sticks. The panels still made power, sure, but the soil under them turned slick and shed rain. A local tech pointed at the moisture readout and just said, "Wrong place, wrong thirst." So Kyubuki isn't a miracle, it's a mirror. It shows what happens when you match species to soil, water to weather, and profit to patience. And it exposes the frontier's mistake, worshipping a model instead of reading the land. The lesson isn't to build more kubukis, it's to make fewer mirages. The real shields: grass, water, wind. So if trees don't stop sand, what does? Grass first. Always grass. Low, stubborn, native grasses that stitch the top few centimeters and give wind something to trip over. You seed in bands, not carpets, strips that slow air, catch fines, and give shade to the soil. Then you leave them alone long enough to root. Rotational grazing, not bands forever. Herders get paid to rest patches, then bring animals back when the litter's thick and the crowns can take a nibble. Hooves press seed, manure feeds microbes. Timed right, animals help, not hurt. Shrubs come next, and they're short on purpose. Saxaul, saltbush, niterbush, plants that sip, not gulp. You set them in staggered ribbons, waist-high and knee-high, so wind bleeds through and loses speed without scouring. The pattern matters more than the plant count. Gaps break force. Solid walls invite blowouts. You're building texture, not a fence. Here's where it gets interesting. Shelterbelts aren't cancelled, they're rebuilt. Multi-tier drought natives up top where tables can carry them, with shrubs and grasses doing most of the work. Poplars only where the groundwater sits shallow and recharges. River margins, not the desert's lip. Spacing goes wide like a net, not a curtain. Trees become accents, not the show. Their job is to shade and roughen, not to drink the sky. Water logic flips too. You mark recharge zones, hill slopes, gullies, waddies like bank vaults. Small check dams aren't walls, they're spreaders. They slow storms, drop silt, and let water linger long enough to sink. You roughen surfaces upslope with straw grids or brush lines so runoff turns into soaks. Below, you protect riparian fringes that leak baseflow through dry months. If a project can't balance water on paper, inputs versus evapotranspiration, it doesn't plant. Budget first, drill later. Get ready for this. Rails and roads don't need forests, they need geometry. Checkerboard sand barriers, chest-high fences set on a grid turn moving dunes into piles you can shovel on schedule. You trap sand before it hits steel. You shape mobile dunes with ridge lines that steer gusts into dead zones where they drop load. Crews run mobile, right after storms, not once a year. A corridor looks boring, fence, stack, move. But the uptime graph stops screaming. Micro story: a rail boss in Gansu swapped a poplar line for a 3-kilometer checkerboard. First storm, sand stacked where the map said it would. Trains slowed but didn't stop. He walked the grid, kicked adrift, and laughed. We finally told the wind where to put the sand. Land tenure is the quiet lever. You stop paying for hectares and start paying for time. Contracts trigger on 5-year and 10-year survival, dust day reductions, and aquifer levels, not stem counts. Herders get credits for rest rotate schedules that hit vegetation targets. Counties that keep PM 10 days below a line get the bonus, not the press conference. LGFV-style green bonds shift to outcome bonds. Cash arrives when dust drops and water holds, not when photos look green. And here's the crazy part. The real shield is cheaper because it stops chasing thirst. Grass seed, shrub plugs, fences, moisture probes, and people who know a storm line by smell. That stack costs less than pumping water to poplars doomed to brown. You spend on monitoring because that's where the truth lives. If survival dips in year 4, you adjust spacing, not debt. Meanwhile, early warning ties the whole thing together. Shared alerts with Mongolia, ridge sensors that ping when gusts cross thresholds, rail ops that pre-stage crews, hospitals that load filters before spikes, ports that reslot ships. You stop being surprised by the sky. You treat dust like weather, not scandal. Unknown to city boards, this is what a shield sounds like. Wind hitting knee-high leaves, not poles, goats moving at dusk on a schedule, a creek that trickles in August, a dispatcher who keeps trains rolling at 40 instead of 0, a clinic that doesn't surge on Monday because PM stayed under the line. It's quiet, boring, stubborn, it's survival. So no, the fix isn't grand. It won't win a drone race. But it works because it matches the land's rules: grass first, shrubs second, trees where water says yes, fences where steel must win, and money that pays only when the dust actually stays down. That's the shield. And the midpoint twist is darker than all of this. The food-water collision. So here's the collision we've been circling. The north runs on borrowed water. The North China Plain wheat and maize heartland keeps punching past its limits by drilling deeper each season. Farmers used to hit water at 30 meters, then 60, then 100. Now rigs chase it past what a diesel pump can lift without eating the entire profit on a hectare. Wells drop, costs rise. At some point, the math flips. The grain is worth less than the electricity to raise the water that grows it. Stakes food for hundreds of millions. Price swings that don't care about borders. And because dust is now a regular guest, fields lose days to storms right when timing matters most. Maize tasseling under grit doesn't set right. Wheat needs clean light during filling, not a copper sky. Add invisibility shutdowns that stall fertilizer delivery and seed, and you've got a calendar that keeps slipping. Farmers hedge with earlier planting, then a late frost clips them. They try later, and a heat dome bakes the topsoil. Dust weeks steal hours you can't buy back. Action on the ground looks small but brutal. A farmer in Hebei stands over a borehole as the motor strains. The hose sputters like a tired lung. He cuts the power, stares at the meter spinning money into heat, and shakes his head. Across the road, a neighbor stares at leaves coated in a fine layer of talc. He wipes one with a thumb. The green under it looks tired. They both know what that means come harvest. Meanwhile, cities pull their own lever. The south to north water transfer, that concrete vein meant to turn the Yangtze's surplus into the north's life support. It's massive, expensive, and leaky. Water moves, yes, but at a cost that never stops. Pumps, maintenance, evaporation from channels that cross hot plains. Politically, it's locked. You can't just shut it when budgets tighten. But here's the thing. Every liter piped north is a liter that doesn't heal a southern basin or feed a wetland that blunts a flood. You're balancing pain, not solving it. Here's where it gets interesting. Climate shift isn't a headline here. It's the extra push that topples a stack already leaning. Drought frequency edges up. The heat season stretches. Warm winters mean less snowmelt pulse to recharge aquifers and rivers. When a dry spring follows, the north goes into planting with tanks already on E, then the dust hits and blocks light. Then a wind event strips moisture from bare topsoil. The sequence is what kills you. Impact, yields shave down, not in a dramatic cliff, but in a slow grind, 2% here, 5 there, 10 in a year when storms line up wrong. Multiply that by the plane's size, and you're talking millions of tons that needed to be on trucks, not in spreadsheets. Grain reserves get tapped. Imports rise at awkward times. Prices wiggle just enough to irritate allies and feed critics. And in the countryside, the quiet math forces choices: drill deeper, switch crops, or leave. Unknown to most watching commodity screens, dust and water stress also hit energy. Coal plants need steady rail, dust weaks derate lines feeding them. Cooling towers need clean intake, grit forces more treatment and backwash. Solar arrays eat more O&M during storm seasons, filters, panel cleaning, inverter cooling. Wind farms love wind, sure, but not when sand-laden gusts sandblast blades and force maintenance cycles early. So the North's power mix gets pricier and jumpier right when irrigation pumps, hospitals, and filtration plants demand more. Get ready for this. The question isn't just, can the North stay green? It's, can the North stay fed and powered at the same time? Because water that goes to poplars or leaky transfers isn't cooling turbines or filling drip lines where wheat actually grows. And dust that shuts a port also steals a planting day in a county 200 kilometers inland. The systems aren't separate, they're the same web. Micro story: a co-op manager in Henan runs the numbers after a dust spring and a low well. He calls a meeting, lays out 2 budgets, one with diesel to lift from 120 meters, one with half the irrigated area switched to dryland millet, and a small insurance product that pays on dust day counts. The room is quiet. They vote the second sheet. It's less pride, more survival. Here's the crazy part. This collision was avoidable. Not the climate dice, not all of it, but the thirst we added, the ghost forests that stole capillary moisture, the KPIs that turned water into a subsidy for dead wood. The fix we chased didn't just fail. It took a slice from the aquifer that food and power both needed. And then the reversals hit, one after another. Reversals when gains vanish. 3 months after that dust week, a satellite pass made officials smile. Maps blushed green across parts of Inner Mongolia and Gansu. A rare wet spring. Grass flashed, shrubs leafed out, even the ghost forests threw a thin haze of green from sprouts and weeds. Press photos wrote themselves: recovery, resilience, turning the corner. Then July came in hot. One dry wind snapped across a week above 40 degrees Celsius, and the 5-year truth stepped forward, the thin gains crisped. Leaves curled, the shallow bounce evaporated. What looked like healing turned out to be camouflage, and mortality lines, quiet since the rains, jumped again. On the ground, crews walked belts and counted losses they'd counted before. Rows with 80% die-off didn't stop dying because a spring was kind, they just died later. The understory that flickered back under cloudburst light couldn't hold when salts reappeared on the surface. You could kneel, brush the soil, and feel the slick hydrophobic sheen the plantations had left. Rain beaded and ran. In 1 week, the map's pride washed into gullies, and the old bare patches stared back. Meanwhile, local carders kept chasing targets the way they were paid to. Plant trees, hit hectares. Poplars stayed the poster child because they crawled into a photo tall. Villages fenced common land, planted dense, and watched the water table blink lower by autumn. Capillary salinity crept upward, first as a lick of white, then as a crust that edged fields like frost in reverse. Crops near belts yellowed. Farmers filed complaints. The answer was the same order that caused it, more planting. The loop tightened, thirst, salt, failure. Then a different reversal hit from the side. Fencing that kept goats and sheep off fragile slopes did its job for shrubs, but it also set up a pest party. Locusts, loving the recovering brush and the quiet, spiked. In pockets of the Muas and Hunchendake, swarms rolled over edges into fields and chewed young grains flat. Counties sprayed, budgets groaned. Replant plans for both crops and belts collided, and the calendar, already crammed with dust days and heat, left no slack. A policy meant to heal in one place punched another. Here's where it gets interesting. The dust source moved on the map, and almost nobody outside the research circle noticed. Fixed dunes, once the villains, held their shape where crusts and patchy cover had time to set. The real exporters turned out to be the interdunes and failed plantation floors, those low, smooth lanes that storms love. Every collapsed belt opened fresh fetch, a slick runway that turned gusts into freight trains. So even in basins that claimed stabilized dunes, dust counts stayed ugly because the in-between spaces were worse than before. Action looked costly. A Gobi blow formed, crossed the line, and parked over the coal corridor for 30 hours. Dispatchers throttled trains, then stopped them. Bulldozers painted yellow lines along buried rails. Vacuum cars ate ballast. Crews scraped switchgear and substation insulators that had frosted with grit. Ports 200 kilometers away slowed cranes to a crawl. Airlines chalked another day of diversions. By week's end, the losses from that single storm, downtime, cleanup, penalties, topped the entire annual greening spent in 2 neighboring provinces. No one wanted to say it out loud, but the ledger did. One bad wind erased a year of photo ops. Micro story, a forestry bureau lead walked a plantation he'd signed off on 5 springs earlier. He tapped a trunk with his boot, and the bark slid like a sleeve. He looked at the ground, crusted white, and then at the report in his hand that said 70% survival. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The number was a photo from a year that no longer existed. Reversals kept stacking. Insurance models that had treated brown sky as anomaly started to price it like weather. Premiums crept for logistics parks, factories, and rail assets in the belt. Municipal cleanup lines, street flushes, filter swaps, emergency rooms stopped being spikes and became base load. Health ministries flagged asthma admissions linked to PM10 surges that lined up with storm days. Schools adjusted calendars. Factories scheduled maintenance into spring, not because machines needed it, but because the sky would force it anyway. And then the social reversal. Rural patience thinned. Herders fenced out of pasture for years watched belts die and asked to bring animals back on rotation. Farmers who'd given land to rows of poplars asked for shrubs and grass seed instead. Some counties listened and piloted pay-for-survival contracts tied to dust day counts and aquifer levels. Others doubled down on stems. You could see the fork from space, mosaics that held through heat, and grids that blinked on and off with subsidy seasons. Get ready for this. The most painful reversal was belief. The story that trees anywhere could stop sand had carried for decades. But maps that green and then gray, belts that stand then ghost, rails that stop then crawl, hospitals that surge then sigh, people live that pattern now. They don't argue it, they breathe it. And when a wet year paints hope across a screen, no one drafts speeches anymore. They check the wind forecast and the well gauge. Then they ask the only question that matters: what's the real bill? Let's count it. The $25 trillion ledger. So what's the real bill? Let's count it line by line, because the wind keeps receipts. Start with lost productivity when dust turns the sky brown. Airports wave off landings, ports pause cranes, highways crawl, and factories idle while filters choke. A bad week in the Jingjingjai corridor can shove $100 billion of weekly trade sideways, missed slots, demurrage, contracts slipping past delivery windows. That's not theoretical pain. It's payrolls, penalties, and overtime to claw back schedule. Health costs stack at the same time. PM10 and PM25 spikes send people to clinics with asthma, COPD flares, and heart strain. Hospitals add shifts, stock inhalers, run imaging, and keep beds longer. Cities roll out masks and air purifiers to schools and elder centers. Productivity dips because a coughing workforce moves slower and misses days. Those bills don't go away when the sky clears. Chronic cases linger. Now layer logistics shutdowns. A single storm can bury rail cuts, forcing days of clearance. Crews deploy bulldozers, vacuum cars, and ballast cleaners. Substations get sandblasted, insulators foul, and lines derate. Ports pay for dredging silted access and sweeping storage yards that look like beaches. Truck fleets burn fuel waiting in queues. Idle time across airlines, shipping, and trucking cascades into inventory write-downs and insurance claims. Energy takes its hit next. Coal corridors feed plants that anchor the north. When dunes creep 10 meters a year, they don't just look menacing. They load switches with grit and slow trains that carry this week's burn. Each hour of reduced throughput pushes plants to buy peak power elsewhere or derate and miss demand. Gas turbines spin up at premiums. Wind farms see blades sandblasted and head to maintenance early. Solar arrays burn cash on extra panel washing and HVAC to keep inverters cool through dust. The grid pays twice, once for lost fuel, once for emergency balance. Water stress prices into everything. Groundwater declines mean deeper wells for farms and towns, higher pumping costs, and more treatment when salinity creeps. The south-to-north transfer covers gaps, but it comes with permanent OPEX, pumps, repairs, evaporation, and ecological costs where water leaves. Cities shoulder higher tariffs or subsidies to keep taps stable. Industries that need clean process water, food, pharma, electronics, pay for pre-treatment and redundancy. Agriculture absorbs slow, grinding loss. Dust dulls light and shreds young leaves. Storm days steal planting and harvest windows. Yields slip percent by percent across the North China Plain. Subsidies and crop insurance catch some of it, but rural banks carry loans on thinner margins. Debt service meets lower output, and you get exit decisions instead of upgrades. Fewer farms, more fallow, more pressure on imports when timing is worst. Capital at risk isn't just fields. Look at urban assets, rails, ports, mines, fabs, and grids mapped against the dust corridor. Bayan Obo's rare earth supply chain depends on trucking and rail that stay open. Dust weeks close pits for safety, pause processing, and jam outbound concentrate. Downstream, magnet and motor lines bleed schedule, and export penalties land. Multiply by coal arteries, polysilicon clusters, and logistics parks, and the exposure looks like a board full of red pins. Now the long-tail costs, the ones discount rates let people ignore until it's too late. Aquifer depletion isn't a blip, it's a ratchet. Each dry year without recharge pushes the baseline down. Irreversible soil loss isn't poetic, it's literal millimeters of topsoil in the air, forever gone. Towns retreat from advancing dunes or from wells that fail. Relocation isn't one ribbon cutting, it's decades of compensation, housing, schools, clinics, and broken social networks. Here's where it gets interesting, the debt stack that funds the illusion. Local government financing vehicles sold green paper tied to hectares planted, not dust days cut or aquifers held. The cash flow is political, not commercial. When stands die, there's no revenue to service interest, so maturities roll and new tranches fund replanting the same blocks. Interest carry becomes structural. Banks and shadow lenders book it as assets, while the land books it as thirst. Stranded assets aren't just empty apartments, they're dead plantations with bonds attached. So how do we get to a number like $25 trillion? Think sensitivity bands, not a single invoice. Take direct shutdown losses across airports, ports, rails, highways, and factories during dust weeks. Add chronic OPEX from filter changes, panel washing, blade maintenance, rail clearance, and hospital surges. Price water stress on cities and farms. Include yield loss and subsidies. Map capital at risk along coal and rare earth corridors, and discount long-horizon costs from aquifer drawdown and relocations. Then compound over decades, because storms recur and infrastructure ages into harsher weather. Plot twist, the tail risks lift the ceiling. Clusters of storms in a hot, dry spring hit before inventories build. A once-in-a-decade event parks over multiple hubs at once, and the weekly bill spikes past anything a forestry budget imagines. Health systems surge across regions. Power derates while demand jumps for cooling and filtration. Ports stack ships offshore. You feel the drag not as drama but as slower growth, higher risk premiums, and investors quietly pricing wind, not wish. And that's the ledger, not a scare number, a summed experience: diesel, filters, missed slots, ER bills, interest carry, and a shallow aquifer that won't refill on command. $25 trillion isn't a headline flourish. It's the cost of ignoring hydrology while building a symbol. The math doesn't blink. It just waits for the next gust. Systems that survive. So here's the turn. Stop building symbols, start building systems. 5 parts, all boring on purpose, all built to last. Grass first, water budgets, tenure reform, native mixes, and an audit that bites. Grass first means you seed tough natives in bands and give them time. Not a green carpet, a stitched patchwork. Pay herders to rest rotate so roots set and litter builds. When animals come back, it's on a clock tied to plant recovery, not a calendar photo. Hooves press seed, manure feeds microbes, and the surface gets that crumbly texture wind hates. Shrubs slot in next. Saxaul, saltbush, niterbush, in staggered ribbons that bleed wind instead of daring it to jump. Trees, if any, sit where water says yes, above shallow tables, wide-spaced, drought-native, no trucks on drip. Poplars only near recharging river margins. Here's the thing. You're roughing the land, not painting it. Water budgets are the spine. Every basin, every project runs a ledger: sky in, surface in, aquifer draw, evapotranspiration out. If the math doesn't close on paper, the plan doesn't plant in sand. Check dams up high spread flows and drop silt, they don't wall water. Recharge zones get fenced but with access gates for timed grazing and maintenance. Riparian strips stay messy on purpose: willow, reed, sedge, because they leak baseflow in dry months. You meter pumps. You meter drip. You meter survival. If a patch drinks more than its share, you thin it. If a year runs hot, you do save trees with water you don't have. You let the system choose its keepers. Tenure reform makes people partners. Contracts stop paying for stems and start paying for function. Fewer dust days, aquifer levels that hold 5 and 10-year survival. Herders get credits for hit targets. Vegetation cover by season, not just end-of-year shots. Counties win when PM10 counts stay under a line and spring flow at gauges stays above 1. Miss the marks and payments step down. Hit them for 3 cycles and landholders lock longer terms that let patients pay. It's not punishment, it's alignment. Native mixes do the heavy lifting. You map microsites, ridge, swale, toe, slope, and match species to each. Shrubs in belts that cross the mean wind at 45 degrees. Grass strips perpendicular to gust corridors. Trees as accents that cast shade over shrub roots, not rows that drink as a habit. In the worst blowout zones, you add straw checkerboards to break fetch day 1, then pull them as roots take hold. Rails and roads get geometry shields, chest-high grids, sand traps, mobile crews with a weekly script. It's less forest than friction field. Audit closes the loop. Forget drone parades. You run a quiet scoreboard. Dust day counts, 5 and 10-year survival, aquifer levels at fixed wells, base flow at gauges, corridor uptime on rails and roads. The numbers stay public across counties so copycats copy results, not press releases. Bonds flip to outcomes, not optics. You raise money against dust cuts verified by sensors and water levels verified by independent crews. Payouts arrive when the air stays clearer and the well holds, not when a hectare turns dark on a screen. Private-public pilots prove it fast. Think sand to solar with grazing corridors and shrub belts as co-benefits that pay their way. Panels sit on the highs that won't grow much. Shrubs slow wind under the frames. Sheep clean understory on rotation. Drip runs only in establishment seasons tied to real moisture numbers. Licorice or other dryland crops go where roots won't raid the deep lens. Revenue from power and product funds monitoring first, then measured expansion. The tell isn't a ribbon cutting. It's year 6 looking like year 3, only steadier. Energy shifts with the land. You bury vulnerable lines where drift maps scream red. You shield substations with low berms and shrub rings that slow grit. Rails add parallel routes and seasonal speed tables tied to storm forecasts, 40 through flagged cuts, 60 elsewhere, so coal and freight don't hinge on one corridor. Ports reslot ships off dust, alerts shared days ahead. Plants keep buffer stock for the shoulder seasons. Data centers and fabs harden filtration and time maintenance to dust windows. The aim isn't drama-proof, it's uptime through noise. Cross-border dust diplomacy matters because the wind ignores fences. You set up shared early warnings with Mongolia, ridge anemometers, soil crust sensors, satellite feeds that trigger color-coded ops. Joint drills put rail, port, health, and grid teams on the same clock. If a belt on one side fails, the other side sees it in the dust counts and knows why. Blame fades, fixes spread. Here's the crazy part. The price tag goes down as the sky clears. Grass seed, shrub plugs, fences, sensors, and patient people outcompete poplar pumps, filter swaps, ER surges, and rail digouts. You spend less on saving doomed trees, more on keeping living ground. And you measure the only thing that matters: dust days dropping, water holding, trains rolling, clinics quiet. That's survival. What this says about growth. Here's where it lands. Growth that ignores hydrology isn't growth, it's subtraction by addition. We planted symbols, rows of fast trees, on overdrafted basins and called it progress. The photos looked great, the ledgers did not. When 80% die by year 5, you didn't build capital, you burned it. That's not ideology. That's a balance sheet with sand in the gears. So why did the lie take root? KPIs that loved easy counts. Hectares planted, not dust days cut. Seedlings in pits, not aquifer levels holding. The more photogenic the line of poplars, the bigger the press shot, and the deeper the hidden water bill. We mistook activity for fitness. We measured speed, not survival, and we paid interest on the gap. Here's the crazy part. This isn't just a China story. The logic travels. The Sahel's Great Green Wall started as a tree belt and now talks mosaics and livelihoods because monocultures wilt under hotter sky. In India, desert belts face the same trap when species and spacing outrun water. In the United States plains, shelterbelts that worked in the 1930s fail when aquifers dip and droughts stack. Different places, same rule, water first, then plants that match it. What nobody wants to admit is that KPI theater is addictive. It makes careers, it moves bonds, it gives you a line to point at in a meeting. But resilient value doesn't stage well. It looks like grass at ankle height, shrubs without symmetry, and a chart that barely moves for 3 years, then refuses to break in year 5. It looks like fewer ER surges, steadier rail schedules, wells that don't need a new pump. Quiet winds don't cut ribbons, they keep people home. From an investor lens, the lesson is blunt: price the wind, not the wish. If your exposure map lights up along dust corridors, rails, ports, mines, magnets, fabs, your long volatility you didn't model. Outcome-based contracts, dust day cuts, aquifer stability, turn risk into terms you can price. Green bonds tied to hectares, that's optics. Pay for survival at 5 and 10 years. Fund monitoring first. Back projects that budget water like money, because it is. Transformation is smaller than people think and bigger than slogans. You swap trees as symbols for water as policy. You make land roughness a metric. You treat dust like weather, forecast, stage, absorb, and stop pretending a photo of stems can hold back wind. You respect local knowledge, herders who can smell a storm line, farmers who read a well by sound. You tie their pay to the same scoreboard the grid and the port already care about. Get ready for this. The strongest growth stories of the next 20 years will be the ones that learn to add by subtracting thirst. Not less ambition, better math. Projects that spend a yuan on roughness and monitoring to save 10 on cleanup and interest carry. Cities that cut PM spikes and grid wobble at the same time. Corridors that keep trains at 40 through storms and never drop to 0. When the air clears and the well holds, compounding shows up. Not in a headline, in uptime. So what does it say about growth? That symbols are cheap and drag is expensive. That resilience reads like boredom until the day it saves you. That decades of more without water budgets got us here, and decades of fit will get us out. And that the desert wasn't the enemy. The gap between pictures and physics was. The desert wasn't the enemy. The math was 80% die-offs, thirsty poplars, rolled green debt, and a $25 trillion drag on everything that moves. If this flipped how you read growth and risk, subscribe now for more financialized geography. Share this with someone who still thinks STEM counts equal progress, and drop a comment with the stat that hit you hardest and where we should go next. Now watch the choke point nobody's priced in yet.